Welcome back. This is the part 321 of Unit 0 background information, which is about the basic word stress patterns. For your information, if you didn't watch the part 2 video, as well as the part 1 video, I highly recommend you to watch them before you continue with this part 321 video. Back to today's topic. I apologize that because I found that the topic stress was quite broad, I have broken it down once again into several videos. So there will be one more video just about word stress. Then I'll be moving on to the sentence stress, which I felt to be a separate topic. Anyway, from the lesson procedure, I feel the background information on basic word stress patterns is necessary in advance to practice identifying stresses in words. As always, there are some questions to think about before we continue. 1. Why do we have to learn about stress in English? 2. Is nouns with early stress, verbs with late stress true in English? Feel free to pause this video to think about these questions. Now let's take a look at the first question, which is for thinking about the purpose of learning about stress in English. For this, you might be convinced once I identify the rhythm class that English belongs to. The world's languages are often classified into 3 rhythm classes. Syllable-timed languages, like Korean, which assign approximately the equal amount of time to every syllable. Mora-timed languages, like Japanese, which assign approximately the equal amount of time to every mora, which is a timing unit that is either the same or smaller than a syllable, as it counts any double vowel or final consonant separately. And stress-timed languages, like English, which assign approximately the equal amount of time to every interval between the stressed syllables. In other words, the group of unstressed syllables would receive the equal amount of time, regardless of how many syllables it is consist of. So if a word is spoken in each language, like apple pie, and apple pie, although these can all be represented in syllables, each language would choose the timing unit that works best in keeping a consistent rhythm. Anyway, from here, do you recognize 2 languages that we should be familiar with? Yes, what I meant are Korean and English, which is true for me at least because I can't speak Japanese. And I suppose you can clearly see how Korean and English are different in nature. Difference in the rhythm of Korean and English means that for Korean listeners, it can cause a difficulty in processing a whole word, like only hearing maze from amaze, or in processing a whole sentence, like only hearing amazed man from I'm amazed by the man. And for Korean speakers, this can cause a gap in pronunciation, like when we say orange, it may be hard to tell whether it refers to orange or orange for an English listener. which could be reduced just by adding a stress like an English word. And it can also cause a gap in interpretation, like for a word 우드 박스, it may refer to a wood box with an early stress, a stress on the first word. That means a box for wood. Or a wood box with a late stress, a stress on the second word. That means a box made of wood, which could once again be reduced by adding the stress at the equivalent positions. To give a brief summary, learning about stress in English can help us to listen better, as we can become more able in hearing, predicting, assuming the unstressed syllables. And learning stress in English can help us to speak out better in a way that is heard more clearly and understood as intended. Now, moving on to the second question. You may have heard that nouns tend to have an early stress and verbs tend to have a late stress. This is often used when comparing two identical looking words but with opposite stress patterns, like object versus object, import versus import, insult versus insult, record versus record, contrast versus contrast, permit versus permit, and present versus present. But would each of these stress patterns apply to the nouns or verbs in general? In fact, does English have predictable stress patterns anyway? Languages can also be subdivided into free stress languages and fixed stress languages. And in free stress languages, the position of stress is unpredictable and variable, whereas in fixed stress languages, the position of stress is predictable and invariable. Also, the position of stress in free stress languages are determined by morphophonological factors, which means it requires background knowledge on sounds and meaning of each element. But the position of stress in fixed stress languages are mainly determined by phonological factors, which means it mainly just requires background knowledge on sounds of each element. A few examples of free stress languages include Spanish and German, which have some identical looking words that can vary in meaning depends on the stress. A few examples of fixed stress languages include Polish, where the syllable before the last is usually stressed, and Czech, where the first syllable is usually stressed. Then where does English belong to? English is quite special that most of the time its stress placement is predictable, but it is variable and unfixed that the position of stress can be different from word to word, and that the stress placement sometimes can be figured out based on the phonological factors, but other times require morphophonological factors. So English is often recognized as the in-betweener of these two. These are the phonological and morphophonological factors affecting its stress placement. I will make a start with the explanation of the first two factors within this lesson video, and then we'll continue the last one in the next lesson video. Also, please do note that the factors that affect one word could even overlap. First one, syllable weight is strongly related to the sounds that structure the English words. It literally means how heavy a syllable is. And my discovery so far is that stress tends to be assigned to the heavier syllable, and syllable weight can be determined according to the tenseness of a vowel and the number of coda consonants. Here, a vowel tenseness is whether a vowel is a lax or tense, and this is how the vowels that we will be learning can be categorized. Please note that I have included the diphthongs as part of the tense vowel group, since they mostly work just like tense vowels, and I have subdivided the lax vowels into the weak and strong ones. To further explain the second statement, syllable weight is measured in Mora, which, like Japanese, counts the tense vowel or diphthong as 2 morae and presented as double V. Each coda consonant is 1 mora, and we can still use a C to represent it. Onset consonant is not counted as a mora. Based on these ideas, here are the syllable structure examples for each syllable weight. As you can see, the more the number of mora, heavier the syllable is. At this moment, I wish to move on to the idea of part of speech, as this will be combined to the idea of syllable weight very soon, and then the specific examples will come. As you might already know, part of speech is the category of words with the similar grammatical features, and the examples include noun, verb, adjective, adverb, and so on. Let me share my discoveries on stress placement, specifically on verbs and nouns, to stay focused with my main question. In general, the stress placement procedure begins from the end of the word. In other words, the first step is to check whether the last syllable is able to take a stress. And if it can, then usually the stress would be placed on the last syllable. But if it cannot, then the next step would be to check the second last syllable. Then, how can we figure out if the syllable can take a stress? Here I would like to focus on stress placement conditions for the last syllable only for now, since I have observed that it may work slightly differently for the other syllables, which may be explored further throughout the course. This means that this would be applicable for the 2-syllable words for now. Anyway, to begin with, the similarities. For both categories, if the last syllable has 2 or more morae with a tense vowel or diphthong, this last syllable tends to be stressed, like for these structures. On the other hand, if the last syllable has 1 or 2 morae with a lax vowel, this last syllable tends to be unstressed, like for these structures. However, the differences occur when there are more coda consonants. Whilst verbs tend to put stress on the last syllable with 3 or more morae with a lax vowel, like for these, nouns tend to unstress the last syllable in the same condition. Based on these discoveries, I have tried to recreate my own syllable weight scale like this. With the super heavy being the first choice syllable structure for receiving the stress, and the light being the last choice syllable structure for receiving the stress. Now I'm about to show you some examples in this order so that you can see if the last syllable is stressed or unstressed when it is in each structure. Let's imagine that there is a double-decker with 6 big windows and the door on the other side. This represents the last syllable. Each vertical pairs of windows represent the rhyme components, that is, vowel and or coda consonant, verb stress, and noun stress respectively. The rhyme components will be varied at each stop, representing each syllable weight. And the verb and noun examples that match the rhyme components at each stop will be presented in the bus if the stress is staying with the last syllable, or out of the bus if the stress is leaving the last syllable to transfer to the next first syllable. The first stop is called super heavy. Rhyme components of the super heavy syllable can either be a tense vowel and a coda consonant, or a diphthong and a coda consonant. For both verbs and nouns, the stress tends to stay on the last syllable. So the words like complete, believe, maintain, and domain will all have stress on the last syllable. Please note that red indicates the rhyme components and underline indicates the stress. The second stop is called heavy. Rhyme components of the heavy syllable can either be a tense vowel or a diphthong. For both verbs and nouns, the stress still tends to stay on the last syllable. So the words like agree, payee, appear, career will all have stress on the last syllable as well. The third stop is called near heavy. Rhyme components of the near heavy syllable can be a lex vowel and 2 coda consonants. Here for verbs, the stress tends to still stay on the last syllable, but for nouns, the stress tends to leave the last syllable. So the verbs like connect and digest will have stress on the last syllable, but the nouns like subject and diamond will have stress on the first syllable. The fourth stop is called near light. Rhyme components of the near light syllable can be a lex vowel and a coda consonant. For both verbs and nouns, the stress tends to leave the last syllable. So the words like struggle, bottle, target, and market will have stress on the first syllable. The last stop is called light. Rhyme component of the light syllable can be a lex vowel. Once again, for both verbs and nouns, the stress tends to leave the last syllable. So the words like enter, doctor, carry, money will have stress on the first syllable. Here is the summary of all the words and their stress placement. After our long journey, let's check if nouns tend to have early stress verbs tend to have late stress is true. Where green box indicating the words with the late stress, stress on the last syllable, and orange box indicating the words with the early stress, stress on the first syllable, it seems like late stress appears more often on verbs, and early stress appears more often on nouns. But of course, it needs to be explored more. So, in conclusion, in the main lessons, you will be able to explore, but not limited to, if the stress is assigned to the heaviest syllable in English words, if the last syllable of two-syllable nouns tend to be lighter than the first syllable, if the last syllable of two-syllable verbs tend to be heavier than the first syllable, and the stress pattern for two-syllable adjectives. I hope this lesson gave you some insights about the basic word stress patterns, and I will be back soon with the video on the advanced word stress patterns. Thank you very much for watching.